Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are. Welcome everyone to the LSE for this online public lecture hosted by the Soci-Hoc Southeast Asia Center. My name is Professor Hyun Shin, and I'm Center Director of the Southeast Asia Center and Professor of Geography and Urban Studies here at the London School of Economics and Political Science. The Southeast Asia Center, or SEAC in short, is a multidisciplinary research center which seeks to foster world-leading academic and policy research with a focus on the Southeast Asian social political landscape. SEAC's work is guided by the center's core intersecting research themes of urbanization, connectivity, and governance. You can connect with SEAC's work in a variety of ways, which include our blog that publishes analysis and debate on the region's most pressing issues, and also our newsletter, which provides regular updates on the work and activities of the center. So please visit our center website, www.lse.ac.uk/SEAC for more details. If you like the work that SEAC is doing, please consider supporting us to help expand the impact of our activities. Today, I am very pleased to be here to welcome President Masatsugu Asakawa to SEAC and the LSE today. President Asakawa is the President of the Asian Development Bank and is chairperson of ADB's Board of Directors, and he was elected president by ADB's Board of Governors and assumed office on 17th of January 2020. Prior to joining ADB, he served as special advisor to Japan's Prime Minister and as Minister of Finance. He has a close to 4 decades of career at the Ministry of Finance with diverse professional experiences that cut across both domestic and international fronts. President Asakawa will be discussing getting developing Asia back on track, as Asia has successfully transitioned from a low-income agrarian region in the 1960s to a global manufacturing powerhouse today, driving growth around the world. It will be important to discuss how Asia has been doing and what the ADB's contribution to Asia's development has been. Also, COVID-19 is threatening to turn back the clock on some of the progress Asia has made. Policymakers in the region are striving to regain and sustain growth momentum. So in this context, President Asakawa will discuss how the Asian Development Bank stands ready to help its developing members towards the path of resilient and sustainable recovery through deeper regional cooperation, inclusive human resource development, green infrastructure, accelerated digitalization, and stronger domestic resource mobilization. Before we start, a couple of housekeeping points. For those of you who are Twitter users, the hashtag for today's event is LSE Asia. And please be sure to tag us. And the center's Twitter handle is LSE SEAC. This online event is being recorded and will hopefully be made available as a podcast, subject to no technical difficulties. As usual, there will be the chance for you to put your questions to President Asakawa. To submit your questions, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Questions will be submitted to myself, and I pose as many as possible within the time constraint to the speaker. Please let us know your name and affiliations. We are particularly keen to hear from our students, alumni, and incoming students, so please let us know as well. Now, without further ado, I am delighted to hand over to President Masakawa. President Masatsugu Asakawa. President Asakawa, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Shin, for your kind introduction of myself. My name is Masatsugu Asakawa, Asian Development Bank. So good morning, good evening to everybody. Welcome to this webinar organized by the LSE London School of Economics and Political Science, focused on getting developing Asia back on track. It is clear that the COVID-19 pandemic is the main challenge facing the Asian region and the world today. Vaccines now gives us hope that we can gradually turn the tide of the pandemic and rebuild for a strong recovery, but we are not out of the woods yet. We must focus our efforts now so that the recovery can be lasting and available to all, including the poorest and most vulnerable in our societies. Today, I will present the short-term economic outlook for developing Asia and describe ADB's continuing support to our members during this time of crisis. So I hope I can share my slides with you. So slide number 2, page number 2, please. Yes. First, let me provide a brief overview of the Asian Development Bank. I don't know how you are familiar with our bank. So briefly, ADB was founded in 1966 and has served as Asia and the Pacific's leading regional development bank. From 31 members at its establishment in 1966, ADB has grown as of today to encompass 68 members, of which 49 are from within Asia and Pacific from our region, and 19 outside the region, including UK. Headquarters in Manila, ADB provides strong and reliable finance to our developing members, practical knowledge solutions, and partnerships among a wide range of stakeholders. For your information, the UK accounts for 2.04% of total shares, making it the 14th largest contributor. Among our 1,317 international staff, 87 are from the UK. Slide number 3, please. Okay, so this map shows our 49 regional members. Those in oranges are advanced economies and or graduate economy developing members, starting with Japan, Korea, Taipei, China, Hong Kong, China, Brunei, Singapore, New Zealand, Australia. As you can see, Taipei, China, as we say at ADB, is our member, and thus this makes ADB one of the very few international institutions of which both mainland China and Taipei, China are members. Unless I'm wrong, I remember, APEC is another forum who has both PRC and Taipei, China. But as you know, APEC has no secretariat. So those countries, the oranges, are the countries, which who don't borrow from ADB anymore, although they are located within our region. All right, ADB is a multilateral institution governed by all of our members. Within our region, we provide support to our developed member countries through loans from our OCR, which stands for Ordinary Capital Resources, and grants through our ADF, Asian Development Fund, which is another separate windows to provide grants money and technical assistance. We also support their policy development and promote cooperation and friendship among governments, the private sector, and civil society as well. Our regional members that are advanced economies or have graduated from developing member status, they don't borrow from us anymore, but they do play a vital role in further strengthening and coordinating our efforts, as do our 19 non-regional member countries, including the UK. Okay, slide number 4, please. As the COVID-19 pandemic continues to unfold, its enormous economic and social impact is becoming clearer. Preliminary data show that the region experienced its first contraction in 6 decades last year. More concretely, developing Asia's GDP contracted in 2020 by 0.2%, as is shown on this table. This is a substantial decline from 5.0 growth in 2019. However, growth is forecast to rebound to 6.8% in 2021. So it looks like V-shaped recovery, but we would not call it V-shaped recovery. Why? Because the forecast of 6.8% for this year mainly reflects the fact that last year's growth rate was so low. So it's called bottom effect. Last year's was so low, so this year's are expected to be a little bit high. And if you look at the right-hand side of this table, this shows you a real GDP level, not growth rate, but level in developing Asia. And this graph shows you that 2021, it will not return to the pre-COVID trend. So that's why we would not call it V-shaped recovery, but rather it looks like a U-shaped recovery. Okay, so having said that, a prolonged pandemic still poses the main risk to the economic outlook. But as I mentioned earlier, recent vaccine developments and rollout are reducing this risk. Okay, next page, please, slide 5. The Asia-Pacific region is extremely diverse, encompassing countries with very different income levels and stages of development. As a result, the regional figures mask differences in COVID-19's impact across countries. Growth is expected to rebound this year, as I mentioned, due to base effect and assuming continued progress in containing COVID-19. Commodity exporters like Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, Mongolia, Papua New Guinea, that were hit by lower demand and prices last year, will benefit this year from recovery in commodity markets. But prospects for tourism-dependent countries like Maldives and Fiji and Thailand to some degree are subdued, as the recovery from collapse in global tourism will be very slow. Next slide, please, slide number 6. Okay, turning briefly to the region's largest economy, the PRC. PRC contracted in the first quarter of 2020, as is shown in the left-hand side of this table. It's contracted by 6.8% in the first quarter of 2020 when COVID-19 emerged. But economic activity returned very quickly. This table shows you that in the second quarter, they achieved a positive growth rate of 3.2%, third quarter 4.9%, and fourth quarter 6.5%. So PRC's growth for the entire 2020 was 2.3% and is expected to expand by 7.7% this year, 2021. That's good. We are really encouraged to know that. But from 2022 onwards, I'd like to highlight one thing, that as a PRC will return to the moderating growth trend seen pre-COVID era, as is shown in the left-hand side, once again, of this table. As this table tells you, 2014, PRC enjoyed as high economic growth rate as 7.4%, but it's kept on declining to 7.0, 6.8, 6.9, 6.7, and 6.0 in 2019. Okay, so once again, from 2022 onwards, I am of a view that PRC will return to the moderating growth trend like before. The pace of Chinese economic growth has been slowing down year by year. I believe PRC policymakers need to strike a balance between achieving sufficient growth and tackling structural issues, such as turning the major sources of growth from export and investment to domestic consumption, reducing fiscal and financial risks, addressing aging. Actually, the pace of aging in PRC is even quicker than Japan, and South Korea, and making growth greener and more inclusive. Next page, please, page 7. Earlier this month, as you may know it, the 14th five-year plan, which covers from 2021 to 2025, was approved as a National People's Congress in PRC. This is bound to be one of the most transformational plans since the founding of the PRC, as it departs from the emphasis on economic growth and restructuring that was characteristic of past plans, to focus on the sustainability of growth and the quality of life. Actually, this 5 years plan didn't include the GDP growth target over the next 5 years. To this end, this 14th 5 years plan outlines renewed efforts to close the rural-urban income divide, promote innovation, and move faster towards low-carbon development. Please look at the fourth bullet on this slide, which says domestic market development. Development of the domestic market as priority, boosting consumption. So which clearly means that so far, China really enjoyed a very, very high growth rate, mainly depending on investment. It has been really investment-led growth model. But now, Chinese authorities clearly recognize the need to shift from investment-led growth model to consumption-led growth model, which we call it rebalancing of the economic structure. The fact that they heavily relied on investment to achieve high economic growth so far, it has resulted in one thing. Because investment is one element of domestic demand, of course, but at the same time, if you do investment, that produces some goods, right? And simply because it was heavily dependent on investments for decades, as of now, China has been suffering from a huge excess production capacity, like in the coal production, like in the steel production, and so on. So that's a huge excess production capacity need to be rationalized over years. That's one thing, which is a challenging for Chinese macroeconomic policy. And another challenge China is facing is that in order to people to consume more instead of save more, what is needed is, among others, to establish a very reliable social safety net, like medical insurance and pension scheme. If people feel there is no sufficient pension scheme or medical insurance, they need to save because they worry about their lifetime welfare. So in order to encourage people to consume more and more reliable social safety net system need to be established and introduced in China. All right, having said that, just last week, ADB generally endorsed so-called New Country Partnership Strategy, CPS, for the PRC, which covers the same period, the years from 2021 to 2025. Our CPS is aligned with the main priorities of the 14th five-year plan and supports environmentally sustainable development, adaptation and mitigation of climate change, as well as the challenges of health security and an aging society. Given that these areas of partnership will also contribute to regional and global goods, the PRC's development strategies and plans for the coming years foretell a more inclusive and sustainable future for the country, the region, and the rest of the world. Okay, those are what I wanted to say about PRC. Slide 8. Next slide, please. Moving on to Southeast Asia, departing from PRC, a number of economies, including Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines, have grappled with domestic COVID-19 outbreaks. Containment measures in these countries resulted in large declines of people's mobility, particularly in the second quarter of 2020, as is shown in the left-hand side chart of this page, which led to sharp contraction last year. Growth is expected to rebound this year due to base effects and assuming continued progress in containing COVID-19, as is shown in the right-hand chart. Slide 9, please. ADB also recently calculated the losses from COVID-19 relative to a no COVID scenario. We conducted this analysis factoring in a couple of things. First, declines in domestic demand and tourism, and second, global spillovers. That refers to actually the effect of weaker demand on other sectors and economies through trade and production linkages. This calculation is as of December last year. For developing Asia, pandemic-related losses in 2020 are estimated at $1.4 to $2.2 trillion, or 6.0% to 9.5% of regional GDP. South Asia experienced deeper losses relative to other Asian subregions, in large part due to the prolonged lockdown in India. But the hardest hit economies are small tourism-dependent countries, as is shown in this chart. Okay, next slide, please. Let me now turn to how ADB has responded to this very serious COVID-19 crisis. ADB announced a $20 billion support package in April last year, 2020. By the end of 2020, we had committed $16.3 billion out of this package in the form of grants, technical assistance, and loans to developing member governments and private sector. I would say, during the months of February to March last year, we received a lot of requests from our DMCs, developing member countries, asking for, grant money from ADB for them to purchase necessary medical supplies like masks, ventilators, PPEs, and testing kits, and so on. From April last year, then we started to receive another type of request from our DMCs asking for a loan from ADB for their budget financing. So a major form of ADB support is aimed at addressing the tremendous shortfalls in the fiscal revenues governments are facing due to lockdowns and other pandemic containment measures. While tax revenues are declining, they started to expand their fiscal expenses to do a couple of things. First, to enhance their health sector. Second, to provide a social protection program to the poor and vulnerables. And thirdly, to support the hardest hit industries like tourism, retail industries, and so on. Okay, so tax revenue are declining while fiscal expenditure expanding. So to help fill those budget gaps, we introduced a new instrument called COVID-19 Pandemic Response Option, or CPRO, which has provided much needed quick disbursed budget support until economies can get back on their feet. Our CPRO financing is supporting policy measures that facilitate targeted aid and to households and firms most severely affected by the pandemic, among other key priorities. Our CPRO commitment in 2020 totaled $10.2 billion to 26 countries, as is shown on the upper half of this slide. As I noted earlier, Developing Asia has experienced a wide range of impacts from the pandemic. ADB's long and trusted presence in the region has enabled us to respond to the specific challenges in each of our developing member countries so quickly. So this also includes our support for the private sector through direct lending to private companies, our supply chain and trade finance program, and our microfinance guarantee program, as is shown in the lower right-hand side of this page. We are also able to coordinate and mobilize additional resources through our close cooperation with development partners. So far, we have secured more than 10.9 billion in co-financing for the pandemic response. Especially, I'd like to draw your attention that AIIB also provided co-financing with us for budget financing. And so far, AIIB provided $3.9 billion in total with our CIPRO, co-financing with our CIPRO for 8 countries. Okay, next page, please, page 11. Let me now turn to another measures that is absolutely necessary for our region to overcome the pandemic, swift and equitable access to COVID-19 vaccines. ADB will play a major role in the global vaccination efforts through our new Asia Pacific Vaccine Access Facility. We call it APVAX, which was approved December last year. So quite new facility for vaccine financing. This $9 billion facility, $9 billion facility will complement and reinforce the efforts of our development partners across the world. We will focus our efforts on supporting ADB's developing member governments as they procure and distribute safe and effective vaccines to their populations in a very fair and equitable manner. Our facility has 2 components, as is shown in this slide. Rapid response component for procurement of vaccines, and another component is project investment component for investing in systems and capacity for vaccine distribution. As you may know, some vaccines like Pfizer needs to be stored with minus 70 degrees centigrade, which requires a huge investment. So our investment component will take care of that. The safety and effectiveness of vaccine is a fundamental priority. ADB financing under APVAX will be used only for vaccines that meet strict criteria. As indicated in this slide, vaccines need to be procured by COVAX or pre-qualified by WHO or authorized by stringent regulatory authorities to be eligible for APVAX financing. On 11 March, the Philippines became the very first recipient of our financing support under APVAX with approval of a 400 million loan. In addition to the Philippines, we have to date received requests to access APVAX from many countries in our region, including Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Cambodia, India, Indonesia, Maldives, Mongolia, Nepal, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Tajikistan, and the 4 Pacific island economies of Samoa, Tonga, Tuvalu, and Vanuatu. To ensure the effectiveness of APVAX, as well as to inform other vaccination efforts, ADB will provide technical assistance for needs assessments, policy advice, capacity building, and implementation support. ADB will also support the private sector, including through trade and supply chain finance, and with support for storage, logistics, and distribution of vaccines. Next page, please, page 12. ADB's support to our developing members in 2020 was not limited to COVID-19 related emergency response. We continued to help our developing members address their long-term development needs, such as tackling the impact of climate change, building high-quality infrastructure, and strengthening education. This led to a record high figure of annual commitment in 2020 last year, totaling 31.6 billion US dollars, as is shown in this slide. In the form of loans, grants, equity investments, guarantees, and technical assistance, both to the governments and to the public sector. From 2021 onward, we expect our lending volume to gradually return to the pre-crisis level so that ADB can strike a better balance between responding to our clients' needs and ensuring ADB's long-term financial sustainability. Slide 13, please. Yes. Now let me highlight 5 areas that I do believe are very important for our developing members to achieve a strong, inclusive, and sustainable recovery. First, we need to deepen regional cooperation and integration so that our developing member countries can seize the opportunity of renewed globalization. Here, regional cooperation and integration efforts should be really open, to complement globalization. ADB is doing this by helping our developing members enhance regional trade and investment, diversify supply chains, and strengthen regional health security. Second, we have to address inequality, including gender inequality, which has worsened due to the pandemic. We will focus on investment in human capital as well as social protection. Investment in human capital means investment in such sectors as health and education. These investments will also help restore earnings, remittances, and consumption across economies. Third, we will promote green infrastructure as economies rebuild. These investments can boost economic activity and generate jobs, while also strengthening climate resilience and mitigating the impact of climate change. Despite the challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic, ADB remains committed to deliver $80 billion US dollars in climate finance cumulatively between 2019 and 2030. I will give a bit more detail on this in the next slide. Fourth, we will help to harness the benefits of digitalization. The pandemic accelerated the transition to the digital economy. To capitalize on this, Asean must enhance this digital infrastructure, close the digital divide, and safeguard cybersecurity. And last but not least, we must strengthen domestic resource mobilization, DRM. The pandemic underscored the need for adequate and sustainable tax revenues. Government must close potential tax loopholes, including those arising from the digitalization of the economy, and they must implement other reforms to better tap the domestic resources needed for sustainable growth, effective response to future crises, and achievement of the SDGs. To support these efforts, ADB announced a new regional hub for domestic resource mobilization and international tax cooperation last September. Okay, next slide, please. The last slide. Let me close my presentation by touching upon the important agenda of climate change. In 2015, ADB made a commitment to double climate financing from its own resources to $6 billion annually by 2020. This was the first of such announcements amongst the MDBs, multilateral development banks, in the lead up to the historic United Nations Climate Change Conference, COP21, held in Paris. Out of the $6 billion, $4 billion was to be dedicated to mitigation through scaling up support for renewable energy, energy efficiency, sustainable transport, and building smart cities. And remaining $2 billion was to be for adaptation through more resilient infrastructure, climate smart agriculture, and better preparation for climate-related disasters. ADB achieved this target in 2019, 1 year ahead of our target date. And now, as I mentioned earlier, ADB is targeting to deliver $80 billion US dollars of cumulative climate finance from 2019 to 2030. If you divide $80 billion US dollars by 12 years, it will come up with $6.7 billion per year on average. Actually, in 2020, ADB committed 4.3 billion, 3.5 billion for mitigation and 0.8 billion for adaptation, as is shown in this chart on this page. An additional 730 million was mobilized from external resources. In 2021, we expect to commit, $6.6 billion, of which 5.4 billion for mitigation, 1.2 billion for adaptation for climate finance. And afterwards, we will do our best, try our best to maintain that momentum to achieve 80 billion by 2030. Okay, sorry, last slide, please. Slide number 15. I understand the UK, as a COP26 presidency, identified 5 thematic priorities: adaptation and resilience, nature, energy transition, accelerating the move to zero carbon road transport, and finance. ADB initiatives are mapping well with these priorities. First, this year, ADB is piloting the methodology and developing implementation guidelines to enable its operations, our operations, to align with the goals of the Paris Agreement in terms of adaptation and mitigation. This is a joint MDB initiative. And second, ADB's approach is holistic. In addition to climate-proofing fiscal infrastructure, ecological, social, and institutional and financial aspects of resilience will be integrated in ADB investment. And also, at the same time, we are trying to scale up our portfolio for adaptation and resilience. And thirdly, green, resilient, and inclusive recovery from COVID-19 is a key operational area of ADB's planning directions for this year, 2021, mainstreaming climate and disaster resilience into its support for sectors and themes that have suffered in the current pandemic. And finally, but not least, ADB is supporting dialogues at global, regional, sub-regional levels, including an event at its forthcoming annual meeting on raising the bar on climate ambition, Road to COP26. It's planned in May. Particularly, ADB is currently the lead coordinator of the MDB's working group on climate change for presenting Paris alignment updates at COP26. Okay, let me stop here. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, President Asakawa, for your presentation. I think it gives us very a good understanding of where ADB stands and where ADB is moving to. Before picking up a few questions from the audience, let me give you a couple of questions that might
Sure.
expand the understanding of the audience about the ADB and especially its operation in the coming period. So, given that the COVID-19 pandemic has revealed both new and old challenges to regional connectivity, especially in terms of infrastructure connection and mobility of people, how does the ADB anticipate its changes to the existing lending policies to support the regional development? So that's one question. The second one is about the trade, kind of broader political economic context of trade and economic cooperation. So what, given the ongoing development involving the rise of Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and also the ongoing discussions for the formation of Trans-Pacific Partnership, what will be the ADB's plan to engage with the emergence of these new global institutions? Those are the two questions, perhaps as a start. And we appreciate if you can, given the time constraint, and respond to these in a concise way so that we can pick up a few questions from the audience as well.
All right. Thank you very much for those two questions, Professor Shin. Big questions. And of course, your first question, regional connectivity, infrastructure, and mobility of people, and so on. A couple of points I'd like to mention. One is it will be critical to restore strong trade, deep regional supply chains, and vibrant investment, which have been a major driving force behind the region's rapid growth, obviously. Despite border closures and travel restrictions, I do believe that the economies will reopen and reconnect soon. Globalization will come back. Building on this renewed commitment, we must ensure that the benefit reach low-income, land or sea-locked countries, small businesses, and the poor and the vulnerable. To do this, ADB has ramped up its trade and supply chain finance program, as I mentioned before. To date, these programs mobilized $5.8 billion and helped many SMEs to participate in global trade and supply chains. Trade and supply chain can be easily disrupted due to the insufficient financing, especially during this period of disruption caused by the pandemic. Second, the COVID-19 pandemic has also increased the importance of internet access for daily activities like education, health, remote work, shopping, and entertainment. And this is thus imperative to ensure equitable access to technology within and between countries. As digitalization has become an integral part of longer-term economic recovery, we must explore opportunities to boost economic recovery through digital innovation, foster an environment for technology adoption, and leverage technology for healthcare and remote learning. Thirdly, we also need stronger regional cooperation to build resilience, especially against health security risks. Cooperation is essential to improve overall regional health security by strengthening health systems, improving coordination among national regulators and surveillance agencies, and ensuring real-time monitoring and exchange of information. On emerging outbreaks, ADB's ongoing Greater Mekong Sub-Region Health Security Project has helped improve regional cooperation and communicable disease control in border areas and strengthened disease surveillance and outbreak response systems of GMS countries. And finally, you asked about fiscal infrastructure. Yes, there has been still a huge gap in demand and supply in infrastructure financing. So we need to address that. But at the same time, not only filling the gap in terms of volume, but we need to think that any fiscal infrastructure in our region should be of high quality, right? And high quality infrastructure means a couple of things. First, not only initial cost, but life cycle cost, including operational cost and maintenance cost should be reasonable. And high quality infrastructure should be environmentally friendly and also disaster proof. And also it should promote transfer of technologies to these recipient countries. And most importantly, debt sustainability of that country need to be taken into account when providing additional infrastructure financing. Those are the kind of definitions or principles agreed by G20 countries in 2019. So those principle I'd like to integrate into ADB's operations as well. Concerning your second question about the trade issue, yes, Southeast Asian countries have always retained an outward-looking focus and benefited significantly from increased open trade and investment environment. More recently, we have seen companies relocating their productions to Southeast Asian countries as part of the efforts to make their supply chain more diversified, right? Talking of TPP, which you mentioned, which is known as TPP 11 now, because US decided to withdraw. Thus, the CPTPP also creates trade and investment opportunity for several Southeast Asian countries that are already members, including Brunei, Malaysia, Singapore, and Vietnam. The 11 signatories have combined economies representing 13.4% of the global gross domestic product, at approximately 13.5 trillion US dollars, making the CPTPP one of the world's largest free trade areas. If other SEA countries, Southeast Asian countries, as well as the UK, by the way, UK officially applied for membership on February 1st of this year, and USA, would join in the future, it would represent huge opportunities for the whole Southeast Asian region. And finally, about AIIB, let me mention that ADB is closely collaborating, working with our developing partners, including AIIB, to develop the SEA region. Actually, with the COVID-19 pandemic, we are glad that the AIIB expanded the forms of modalities cooperation with ADB to support two new ADB initiatives. One is CIPRO, and another one is APBAX. And as I told you, AIIB already provided a total $3.9 billion US dollars in co-financing with our CIPRO for 8 countries. And for Philippines, we decided to provide 400 million, whereas AIIB decided to co-finance with us with the amount of 300 million. So as very close collaboration are taking place.
Well, thank you so much. Now we'll pick up a few questions from the audience. And I think there are perhaps 3 short but in related questions, which I guess I can bundle together. So one question is from, and this has received the highest number of votes among the audience. Petra Kiel approaches for pronunciation here from Red Course, saying, climate change is another urgent challenge. And ADB is currently leading the MDB working group, which I believe is referring to multilateral development banks working group on Paris alignment, while it is also updating its own energy policy. And the energy policy and investment choices ADB makes will have impact for decades to come. And civil society is calling for it to go fossil free. So the question here is, could you please share the latest timeline for the review and what your priorities are for the revised policy to ensure ADB is truly Paris aligned, stopping funding all fossil fuels and increasing investment in clean and sustainable renewable energy and energy access for all? So that's one question, asking for future plans. There's also a related 2 short questions, which I would love to bring to your attention. Queen Bo, who is an LSE alumna, is asking, ADB's adaptation finance is still lagging significantly behind its mitigation finance. What concrete steps is ADB taking to scale up its adaptation finance? And another related question here, I hope this is okay to include. It's a question from Ang Zhao, who is an alumnus from LSE in 2000, having graduated in 2008. How will ADB balance the mission between development-oriented funding and its engagement with climate mitigation, particularly when there are big investments in coal mining and coal power in the region? So I think these are all questions around the climate adaptation and mitigation responses by the ADB in thinking about the climate change and related tasks. Please, President Asakawa.
Okay, thank you, Professor Shin. I am very, very impressed by the fact that those audiences are quite familiar with ADB operations, and the questions are quite relevant, and all of them are concerning our climate change, operations. Maybe the first question and third question are closely related to each other. Energy policy, how are we going to deal with our financing for coal, and so on. So let me tell you, that our energy policy, current energy policy is quite outdated, which was introduced as old as 2009. So we are trying to revise it right now. including the discussion how we would deal with coal financing and also gas financing and so on. Oh, by the way, please take note that as a matter of fact, we never provided our financing for coal since 2013. 2013 was the last year. So de facto we stopped, we suspended. But the still policy is there to allow for coal mining whenever appropriate. So we are now reviewing it. We are reviewing and updating our energy policy in line with our strategy 2030 and the global commitment to the Paris Agreement, as you mentioned. So consultation on the new policy are currently underway, including with our member countries, including UK, European countries, Japan, US, Australia, and DMCs, right? And also developing partners and civil society organizations. And we are planning to conduct the so-called public consultation this summer about the draft energy policy. And we hope to have the new policy approved by the end of this year. Okay. We will continue. During that period, we will continue to support our development member countries to reduce their dependence on fossil fuels by setting standards and requirements, such as minimum efficiency levels, emission intensities, while introducing new low carbon and climate resilient technologies, such as renewable with storage, smart grids, as well as carbon capture. About the adaptation portfolio, yes, the audience is quite right that there's a need for ADB's climate adaptation portfolio to be scaled up. And we are taking necessary steps to take a holistic approach to adaptation and resilience, factoring in not only fiscal, but also ecological, social, and institutional and financial aspects of resilience. And these new directions are supported through the ADF 13 thematic window. I don't know if you are familiar with ADF operation or not, but ADF 13 replenishment was completed last year, and we established the thematic window on climate and disaster resilience, and also through ADB's climate change fund. Okay, those are the things we are trying to do. So I hope. As the audience said, there's a little bit unbalanced between our portfolio about adaptation and our portfolio on mitigation. So I hope we are a little bit realign those balance in the portfolio. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we have time to pick up perhaps two more questions, or maybe three. Another question is still related to climate change, and this is a question from Miriam Azrin, who is from Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives. So ADB is a huge source for financing for recovery plans, but we are worried that these loans are dispersed without application of safeguards, information disclosure requirement, and public disclosure. We have monitored several emergency assistance, which include widely contested incinerations or waste to energy incineration projects approved during the pandemic without public consultations. So the question is, how can it ensure that the safeguards are applied and its investments are climate aligned even during the pandemic, especially because these huge loans will affect member countries' abilities to recover better from the pandemic? So this is one question. Perhaps a question from a different perspective will be one coming from Rita Nanjia, who is an LSE alumnus and also ADB alumnus. One of the important post-COVID challenges facing the developing Asia is job losses during 2020. How is ADB emphasizing job creation in moving forward to ensure that growth produces adequate employment opportunities? So perhaps we start with consider these two questions, and I guess they will give us enough time before the end of our session today.
Okay, thank you, Professor Shin. About the first question, safeguard. Yes, we do have separate safeguard policies, but also as is the case with the energy policy, it's time for us to renew it. So we are also working on a revision of our safeguard policy, which includes public disclosure requirement and so on. So right now we try to abide by our own safeguard policy, as much as possible, but simply because this safeguard policy is also very obsolete one, so we expect that renewed safeguard policy will be established, introduced as quick as possible to promote more public disclosure of our data, statistics, figures, and so on. But one thing I'd like to highlight is that we are trying to align our operations to Paris Agreement. It's called alignment with Paris Agreement, and MDB's methodologies to that end has been already agreed. So ADB has committed jointly with other MDBs to align our operations with the Paris Agreement as much as possible by utilizing this methodology. Actually, we road tested this methodology last year, and this year we are going to pilot this methodology and develop implementation guidelines to enable the operations to move in this direction, and is also actively engaged on this initiative, as I mentioned, through chairing of the MDB working group on climate. So we are trying our best, to that end. Second question, yes, job losses after post-COVID challenges. There are many uncertainties about this crisis, but the one thing which is quite certain, regrettably, is that as a result of this crisis, inevitably the income inequality situation would get worsened, and absolute poverty situation will get worsened. So we need to address this quite urgently. And as I mentioned to you, many countries already started to address these issues by expanding their social protection programs, including, for example, non-conditional cash transfer to poor and vulnerable who lost jobs and so on. Yes, those fiscal measures are very much needed from short-term perspective, but from medium to long-term perspective, what is also needed is to secure high-quality jobs for them, let them to participate in the recovery process, in the development process, in the growth process, right? And in order to do so, what is very much needed is more and more investment in human beings, soft infrastructure, like in the sector of education and health. And we have been, conducting, ADB has conducted, of course, our operation in those areas. But, from this year, I'd like to see a more expanded operation in those two areas, education and health, to secure good quality jobs for the people.
Thank you so much again. Well, I guess that's it for today. Thanks everyone for joining us in this wonderful public lecture given by President Asakawa from ADB. It's been a great pleasure to have the opportunity to listen from you and also to hear the questions from the audience. There are many more questions that we see in the Q&A feature. We put them together so that these can be brought to the attention of ADB. So we share the questions we are not able to address with the ADB and with President Asakawa, so that ADB and President Asakawa have a chance to look at these questions.
Yeah, please send those questions to me. I'm more than glad to look at those. Yeah.
Before we finish, a brief reminder here from us, SEAC, about our two forthcoming events. On Wednesday, 24th of March, SEAC is hosting another seminar to be chaired by Professor John Seidel, and we are going to invite two early career researchers, Dr. Michael Intal McCormick from Queen Mary University of London and Dr. Hongxian Lin from National University of Singapore, who will be presenting their latest research project on political economy and religious politics in the region of Southeast Asia. We also have our final event of this term, featuring Dr. Tamaki Endo, who is SEAC's visiting senior fellow and currently an associate professor at Saitama University in Japan. And she'll be discussing her paper, which analyzes the recent complex dynamics of exclusion and inclusion of informality of the city of Bangkok in Thailand. So I think that's it. So thanks very much again to our speaker, President Asakawa, and to all of you in the audience for joining us today. We look forward to welcoming you back to LSE and SEAC. Goodbye.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you very much.